Okay, so I'll try to squeeze in another podcast before I have to run to another meeting. We've been talking about tracking progress on energy under Sustainable Development Goal 7. So let's read a few of the specific indicators. SDG indicator 7.1.1 is access to electricity. Recent progress is not on track to reach universal access by 2030. Globally, access to electricity grew by an annual average of 0.7 percentage points between 2010 and 2021, rising from 84% of the world's population to 91% just in terms of universal access. The number of people without electricity almost halved during this period, as we saw 1.1 billion to 675 million. To bridge the gap, especially for people living in poor and remote regions, the annual rate of growth in access must be 1 percentage point per year from 2021 onward, almost twice the current pace of 0.7%. Is it? Okay, whatever. If no additional efforts and measures are put in place, some 660 million people, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, would still be unserved in 2030. Policies for energy access should demonstrate political commitment and maximize the socio-economic benefits of access, keeping the most vulnerable populations at the forefront of efforts to close this access gap. Next one, clean cooking solutions 7.1.2. The global population lacking access to clean cooking fell from 2.9 billion in 2010 to 2.3 billion. Is it impressive? But the goal of universal access by 2030 remains elusive. Some 1.9 billion people would still be without access to clean cooking by 2030, which is a shame, right? Because this mostly and almost completely affects women and children. If current trends continue, almost 6 out of 10 people without access to clean cooking in 2030 would be residing in sub-Saharan Africa. With the ongoing impact of COVID-19, this was in 2023, and soaring energy prices, the IEA estimates that 100 million people who recently transitioned to clean cooking may revert to using traditional biomass. Eastern Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean were the only regions to sustain progress in access to clean cooking between 2019 and 2021. Unless efforts are rapidly scaled up today, polluting cooking fuels and technologies will continue to claim millions of lives each year while perpetuating gender inequity, deforestation and climate damage. Integrating clean cooking into broader energy planning, improving affordability and devising better delivery mechanisms are some of the key policy levers to drive clean cooking. If such efforts are paired with sustained financing at an adequate level, the world can get back on track to making clean cooking a reality for all. Some optimistic news on what we need to do, but again, implementations are always tricky. 7.2.1 is renewable energy. Universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy depends on faster deployment of renewable energy in electricity, heat and transport, but unless the pace quickens, the share of renewable energy in total final energy consumption (TFEC) will remain sluggish. In 2020, the share of renewable energy in TFEC stood at just 19.1% or 12.5% if traditional use of biomass is excluded. Not much more than 16% a decade earlier. So it was 16% in 2010, only went to 19.1% in 2020. If the world is to be on track to limit the temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees C throughout the century, the share of the renewables must reach 33 to 38% by 2030. In the power sector, renewables would need to account for 60 to 65% of the electricity generation. Much greater effort is needed to increase the use of renewables in transport and heating, both directly through the use of bioenergy, solar thermal, geothermal and ambient heat, and indirectly through electrification, while progressing on energy conservation efficiencies, reducing waste, etc., enhancing renewables-based electricity supply in developing countries deserves particular attention. Positively, developing countries saw a record-breaking renewable capacity growth in 2021 of plus 9.8% year-on-year, with cumulative installations reaching 268 watts per capita. Yet, this growth is unevenly distributed and further action is required in the least developed countries or LDCs. Efficiency is a cute one, that is a low-hanging fruit in many ways. SDG target 7.3 calls for doubling the global rate of improvement in energy intensity over the average rate during the 1990-2010 rate, which means improving energy intensity by 2.6% per year between 2010 and 2030. Yet progress between 2010 and 2020 averaged only 1.8%. To make up for this lost ground, improvement in energy intensity must now exceed 3.4% globally from 2010 to 2030, twice the rate achieved in the past decade. An even greater improvement would be needed to be on track to limit the end of century temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees C. The needed improvements will require more aggressive efficiency mandates, including bans on the sale of the most inefficient equipment and codes requiring that new buildings meet net zero standards. Okay, should I read? I have a few minutes. Yeah, let me go ahead. International public financial flows is indicator 7.8.1. I won't read all of this. We'll look at a figure in a minute, and we already mentioned that the flow of funds have decreased since 2020, even before COVID started. International public financial flows in support of clean energy in developing countries began to drop before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and continued to fall through 2021. In 2021, these flows amounted to 10.8 billion US dollars and 11% drop, in fact, from 2020. 35% less than the 2010 to 2019 average, and only about 40% of the 2017 peak of US dollars 26.4 billion. So we are headed completely in the wrong direction. Commitments remain heavily concentrated in a handful of countries. It is expected that the downward trend in public investments continued in 2022. The data is not in yet. At the time of this report, data released in 2022 and 2023 will provide a clear picture of the effects on public financial flows of the energy crisis in Europe sparked by the war in Ukraine. So you can track the newer data if it's available online, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine created all kinds of problems for Europe in terms of energy for heating in the winter and so on, and all kinds of scary messages came out that maybe they will crank up the coal power plants to cover it. They started buying gas from Norway and US, which made a lot of money from this. So it depends, a lot of claims about how much renewable energy deployment is happening in Europe, and that some countries are even producing excess energy, and yet when Putin turned off the spigot on natural gas, everybody went berserk and started going back to fossil fuel, and European Union even announced that natural gas was a low emission fossil fuel. Fossil fuel is fossil fuel. You cannot start making a fancy footwork out of low emission and high emission, even though you want to phase out coal much faster than natural gas and so on. Yet, we are all stuck in this dance together. So, as the path to realizing SDG 7 and related SDGs by 2030 narrows, the SDG 7 custodian agencies also emphasize the need for stronger and more tangible commitments to close the gaps in access to electricity and clean cooking fuels and technologies, the need for a fundamental transformation of the global energy system as a precondition for sustainable development and global energy security is what is needed in terms of closing the gaps. And the importance of international cooperation and financing to deliver on the vast promise of energy transition is, of course, very critical. Okay, so just to kind of close out, closing out the executive summary, the custodian agencies further urge the international community and policymakers to safeguard the gains made toward achieving SDG 7, to advance structural reforms to overcome obstacles to actions on affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all, and to maintain a strategic focus on the vulnerable countries needing the most support. The remainder of this summary is devoted to the major SDG 7 target areas: access to electricity, access to clean fuels and technologies for cooking, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and international public financial flows to developing countries in support of clean energy. I'll just wrap it up by showing a few figures. The share of global population with access to electricity in 2021, of course, 100% in many places. Fortunately, even in South America and parts of the Middle East, of course, Southeast Asia and Australia, of course, China has 100%. India is still lacking. It's in the range of 50 to 99.9%, but they are growing very rapidly. Top 20 access deficit countries are all in Africa, with Pakistan and Myanmar showing up here. The 20 countries with the largest access deficits in 2021 by region and income levels. I won't read this, but 75% or 509 million of the global population without access are all in these countries. So what is the largest one? Sub-Saharan Africa, of course, and then you have many countries within that. You have Myanmar, Pakistan, Kenya, Angola, United Republic of Tanzania, Nigeria. So this is also Sub-Saharan Africa with better access. I removed the scale there. So these are lower middle income countries, and these are low income countries. Okay, so share of population with access to clean cooking fuels and technologies in 2021, not bad for, let's say, India and China. India has ways to go. Africa remains very poor in terms of large areas with hardly any access to clean cooking fuel technologies, clean cooking fuels and technologies. Okay, so you see this is a good map because it shows where the hotspots are, so that strategies and resources can be funneled towards them. Growth in renewable energy seems impressive, but as we said, it's not going fast enough. And of course, primary energy intensity has dropped, but not good enough in terms of just phasing out fossil fuels from primary energy sources. And annual international public financial flows, as we mentioned, has been dropping, and in fact, compared to 2017, we are less than 50% of that, as we said before. This is not a good trend at all, so we have to quickly look at data from 23 and 24, or at least 22 and 23, to see where we are headed. Let me leave this here because I have to really run, but this is about tracking progress. So here, examination of each SDG 7 indicator reveals the need for additional information. The custodian agencies emphasize the need to strengthen resources for enhanced national data collection within current and planned international programs on energy transitions. Domestic statistical capacities too must be reinforced. To this end, World Bank and the WHO have prepared a guidebook to integrate energy access questions into existing national household surveys. The custodial agencies responsible for this report also host webinars for statistical agencies and produce statistical guidance and reports on data collection, and regularly consult with national statistical offices about the estimates they provide. Continuing efforts by the World Bank, WHO, and other custodians to mainstream energy access questions into national household surveys are an important form of the support for those offices. I definitely have to leave it here because I need to run.